In the beginning, of course, I was an abstract expressionist painter. And the painting as an abstract expression is very different than painting the way I do now. The whole approach is different. This is not, one of the things that I learned as an artist is abstract painting is difficult, portrait painting is difficult, surreal painting, they're all difficult if you're going to create art, significant art. They're all difficult. And one of the things that I noticed somewhere along the line is, and I even noticed this in some of the paintings when I was traveling in Europe, there are a lot of great paintings that have surreal overtones. These painters never even heard the term surrealism, but instinctively, for example, when I look at the Mona Lisa, there's something slightly surreal about it. It looks somewhat apparitional. It's very still and it's very beautiful. And when I was in, we talked about this earlier, I got a Guggenheim Fellowship grant, and when I traveled through Europe, I just stopped at every museum along the way. And one of the painters, I would see painters that struck me in each one of these places, like Veneziano, when I saw his altarpiece at the Uffizi and so forth and so on. And there was a painting by Albrecht Althofer, who was an absolute astoundingly good painter, of a cathedral. I mean, when I describe this, you can see it is a peculiar thing. It's a picture of a cathedral, and it has a circle of angels, hovering in a circle in the ceiling of the cathedral. Now, if you just think about this, forget about religion, whatever, here you have a scene in the middle of a church with a circle of figures moving through the church and hovering in this as just to taking it at face value is very surreal, and all of the putis that the artist paint and so forth and so on. But what more directly led me into this was actually looking at moonlight pictures. Bierstadt made a lot of beautiful moonlight pictures. And being up here in the Cape and looking at moonlit scenes. And of course, the great painter to me, Albert Pinkham Ryder, there was a painting of his called, I forget the name of it, but it was a painting of maidens in a moonlight setting in a river bathing, and the Siegfried coming along on his horse. And this painting is, if you don't know it, you should know it. It's just a magnificent work of art. And the beauty of the light and the atmosphere and the slightly surreal atmosphere there, that all intrigued me. And I had been painting figurative expressionist paintings, which also had a slightly surreal overtone to them. Many of them did. And the transition was actually much slower. If I could show pictures of how it happened, it was much slower than you might think. In other words, there were images from my figurative expressionist picture, which had very quiet, still surreal overtones. But then when I got into this kind of, there's so many names given to it. Some of the critics call it fantasy. Some call it, I forgot some of the names that they apply to it. Surrealism. It's not really surrealism. Surrealism, I know surrealist painters very well and how they started and the Dada school and all of that. I studied all of that with Robert Motherwell. And I'm not a surrealist. What I'm doing is, it's very difficult to explain this, but imagine yourself coming upon a scene that is very striking and very peculiar and not the usual, very odd and very atmospheric and could be very dark and shady. and you look at the scene, and it's enigmatic. It's a strange spell. It's a strange atmosphere, and you're struck by it. That's what I strive to achieve when I paint these pictures. I know I'm not being exactly, I'm not being as articulate as I could be, but it's very hard to put into words things that are visual. Same way it's hard to put into other words a work of poetry. But there is something I think poetic about these. But it's, by the way, making them is, I find, very difficult, because when they come from dreams, and some of them have come from dreams, then I'm happy because I know they're valid. You can't make up dreams. Dreams come from somewhere deep within. There's no artificiality about working from a dream. Some of them don't come from dreams. They come from just daydreaming. I think of that poem, I think it was Wordsworth, where he talks about the daffodils, he says, "When off upon my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude." Well, this is the bliss of solitude, where I'm lying there and I see a particular scene and I say, I got to paint that. Well, that sounds good until you start, stretching the canvas and getting the charcoal and drawing and working and it's a difficult process, and every undertaking is it's a difficult undertaking. It's not like abstract expressionism, which suited me perfectly. I stretched the canvas, I squeezed out that paint. Boy, I couldn't wait. And I got the brush and wailed away and so forth. And that was one thing. This is much more cerebral. It requires trained skills. You don't have to be skillful to paint an abstract expressionist painting. I admire them. I think they changed my life, but it's a different process, and I hope I've offered some explanation. It was not as clear and articulate as I would like to be, but I think I conveyed something.